The morning sun cut through the kitchen window at the precise angle that made the countertops gleam like marble. Marcus Chen stood there with his second cup of coffee, watching the steam curl upward in lazy spirals, and allowed himself a moment of genuine contentment. These moments were rare now. At 42, with two teenagers, a wife who'd just been promoted to senior partner at her law firm, and a job that demanded his presence at the office most weekends, Marcus had learned to recognize peace when it landed on him. It was Saturday, his day, his rules. "Dad," his daughter Emma's voice carried through the house with the particular urgency that only a 17-year-old could manufacture. "Dad, can Tyler come over? His parents are at their cabin, and he's literally dying of boredom." Marcus turned to find her in the doorway, still in her pajamas at 9 a.m., her black hair tangled into a knot at the top of her head. She'd inherited her mother's dark eyes, the ones that could somehow look both innocent and entirely scheming at the same time. "Tyler's always welcome," Marcus said, which was true. Tyler Chen had been Emma's best friend since 7th grade, and while Marcus had learned not to ask too many questions about the nature of teenage friendships, he knew Tyler came from a good family and never caused trouble. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Emma rushed forward and kissed his cheek with a daughterly obligation before disappearing back upstairs, her voice already summoning her brother. "Justin, get dressed, people are coming." Marcus smiled into his coffee. Justin was 15, an age that seemed to consist primarily of sleeping and philosophical complaints about the unfairness of existence. But he'd emerge, probably irritable, probably still half asleep, and he'd play pool games and order pizza and complain about everything. And by the end of the day, he'd have grudgingly admitted to having fun. This was the weekend Marcus had been living for all week. His wife Sarah had left before dawn for a settlement conference downtown. She'd kissed the top of his head while he was still more asleep than awake. "Sorry, babe, this case is a nightmare, but Sunday is mine. I'm taking the day completely off. We could do brunch." Brunch, he'd mumbled into the pillow, already falling back asleep. By 10:30, the house had transformed. Tyler arrived with his characteristic energy, tall, lanky, perpetually cheerful despite everything he didn't talk about. The kids immediately gravitated toward the pool. It was June, hot already, the kind of heat that made you grateful for chlorinated water and endless summer stretching ahead. Marcus had spent the morning cleaning out the pool house, replacing old towels, checking the filter, treating the water chemistry. He was meticulous about the pool. It had been a significant investment 5 years ago, back when Sarah's career was hitting its stride, and they decided to actually enjoy one of the perks of their financial success. The pool had become a centerpiece of their life, a place where the kids had learned to swim properly, where Sarah did her laps on summer mornings, where they'd thrown neighborhood parties that had become legendary in their suburb. He'd also spent considerable time setting up the paint supplies. This was the secondary purpose of today's gathering. Emma had mentioned, almost in passing, that she and her friends had a project for a community center, something about a mural in the kids' recreation room. They needed to practice the designs, test colors, figure out proportions. "It's just practice," Emma had said. "We might mess up, so we figured we'd use the pool deck. It's already weathered, we can wash it off." Marcus had nodded and understood. This was the kind of thing good parents did. They accommodated creative projects. He'd bought acrylic paint in bulk from the art supply store, grabbed rollers and brushes, and set everything up on the wide concrete deck surrounding the pool. It would be fine. Messy, but fine. By 11 o'clock, Emma, Tyler, and Justin were spreading paint swatches across the concrete, debating colors with the intensity of people making decisions that mattered. A fourth friend, Alexis, a quiet girl with purple-streaked hair who was apparently their art class partner, had also shown up. "The purple is too light," Alexis was saying, tapping one swatch with her brush handle. "We need it deeper, more dramatic." "But then it won't pop against the turquoise," Emma countered. "Look," she arranged the colors. She wasn't wrong. They looked good together. Marcus watched from the window of the kitchen, making a sandwich he didn't really want, just to maintain the illusion of being busy and not hovering. This was another skill he'd cultivated, the art of supervision that didn't look like surveillance. Around noon, after the kids had grown bored with the paint debate and had drifted toward the pool itself, Marcus went outside. The day was gorgeous, genuinely, almost impossibly gorgeous. The sky was a cloudless blue that didn't look real. The temperature was perfect. The kids were in the shallow end, splashing and laughing, their voices carrying that particular quality of teenage joy that made you remember, suddenly, what it felt like to be young. "Pool looks good," Tyler called out, swimming backward. "Is it new?" "About 5 years," Marcus replied, settling into one of the lounge chairs. "Still holding up." "My parents used to have a pool," Tyler said, his voice changing slightly. "In our old house, I used to love it." Marcus knew from the careful way Emma had mentioned it once that Tyler's family had gone through some financial upheaval a few years back. They downsized, sold the house with the pool, moved to something smaller. Tyler didn't talk about it much, but Marcus made a mental note to keep the pool invitation open. It seemed like the kind of thing that mattered. "You should come over more often," Marcus said. "Use it any time." "Really?" Tyler's face brightened. "That's cool, thanks, Mr. Chen." Just Marcus is fine. The afternoon unfolded in that particular Saturday rhythm, a kind of blessed aimlessness that required nothing. The kids got out of the pool, went back to the paint. Marcus ordered pizza. Sarah called briefly to say the settlement was taking longer than expected, probably wouldn't be home until evening. He said he missed her. He did, but he also felt the private relief of the extended afternoon, of no one needing anything urgent from him. Around 3 o'clock, Emma and her friends moved the paint supplies closer to the pool, apparently having decided that the best way to test paint durability on a community center wall was to apply it to the concrete pool surround. Emma showed Marcus their vision, a mural of abstract shapes and colors, something that would brighten the recreation room, something that spoke to youth and energy and hope. "It's beautiful," Marcus said, and meant it. "You're talented." Emma smiled, pleased. She still had moments where she wanted her father's approval, and Marcus tried never to take those moments for granted. He watched as they began to apply paint in earnest, wide, bold strokes with the rollers, more precise work with brushes for the details. The patterns emerged, deep purples, vibrant teals, shimmering golds. They worked with concentration, occasionally stopping to debate a choice or reconsider a color. Justin came back inside after about 20 minutes of assisting with the paint. "This is boring," he declared, the eternal complaint of the teenage boy. He disappeared into his room, presumably to game or scroll or whatever it was he did for hours. By 4 o'clock, the sun had begun its slow descent, and the afternoon had taken on that particular quality of slowness that preceded dinner. Too late for lunch, too early for dinner, suspended in a pocket of time that didn't quite exist. Marcus was in the kitchen, considering what to make for dinner when he heard Tyler call out. "Hey, Mr. Chen, I think your pool filter might have an issue." Marcus walked outside, expecting some small maintenance thing he could handle. Tyler was pointing at the water, which did look slightly hazier than it should, the color a touch off. "It's probably just the afternoon light," Marcus said, but he walked down to the water's edge to check. He'd always been particular about the maintenance. He knelt at the edge, looking at the water level, the clarity. That was when he noticed it. At first, it seemed like a shadow, a dark shape beneath the water's surface in the deep end. Marcus frowned. He'd cleaned the pool that morning. There shouldn't be anything down there except the drain valve. "Huh," he said. "Probably a leaf or something. I'll skim it out." He stood up, about to go get the pool net, when something about the shape registered differently in his mind. It wasn't the random shape of debris. It was too geometric, too solid. It looked almost like... "Dad," Emma called from where she was painting, her voice breaking his concentration. "Is that cloud shaped like a hot dog to you, or is it just me?" Marcus turned, grateful for the interruption, grateful for the normal question, grateful for the simple mystery of cloud shapes that didn't require investigation. "Kind of a weird hot dog," he called back, squinting upward. By the time he turned back to the pool, he'd half convinced himself that he'd been seeing things. The afternoon heat, the intensity of the sun, the particular angle of the light across the water, all conspiring to create phantom shadows. He got the pool skimmer anyway, just to be thorough. The skimmer was kept in the pool house, a small structure next to the deep end that housed the filter system, the chemical supplies, and various maintenance equipment. He opened the door and stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. The pool house was cool, organized, smelled of chlorine and concrete. Marcus grabbed the long-handled net skimmer from its hook and headed back toward the pool. This was the moment. This was the instant before everything changed. He didn't know it yet, but this was the last few seconds of his life as he understood it. After this moment, everything would be different. His assumptions about the world, about safety, about his neighborhood and his friends, and the invisible structures that held society together, all of it would shift. He didn't know any of that. He was just a man with a pool net, concerned about debris, moving through an ordinary Saturday afternoon toward something that would stop his heart. He walked back toward the water. The shape was clearer now, definitely not a leaf, not random debris. Marcus extended the pool net, trying to snag whatever it was. The handle was long, but in the deep end he had to stretch. He felt the net make contact with something solid, something that had weight, something that resisted. He pulled. The object rose toward the surface, water cascading off it. Marcus's brain was trying to tell him what he was seeing, but his brain was refusing the message, rejecting it as impossible, as wrong, as something that didn't belong in a Saturday afternoon in a suburban pool. The object broke the surface. It was a paint can, a large, industrial-sized paint can, sealed, the kind used for big projects. But that wasn't what froze Marcus in place. What froze him was what he could see through the plastic sheeting wrapped around the can, what appeared to be fabric underneath, and below that, a shape that his mind absolutely refused to interpret but his instincts were screaming about. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered. He pulled harder, using both hands now. The can came free of the water sloshing off it. He set it down on the pool deck with a wet thud. That was when he noticed the others. There were more of them, down at the bottom of the deep end. Not just one. Multiple shapes, multiple objects, multiple cans, all partially visible through the water. Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Emma," he called, his voice not quite right. "Emma, get everyone inside now." "What? Why?" "Just do it, please, inside now." Something in his tone made her stop arguing. She gathered her friends, calling to Tyler, and they filed reluctantly into the house. Marcus barely noticed them go. He was staring at the paint can at his feet. His hands were shaking as he approached it. The plastic sheeting was secured with tape. He found an edge and pulled hard, ripping the plastic away. The industrial paint can's lid came loose. Inside, beneath what appeared to be actual paint, the acrylic kind, the kind the kids had been using all afternoon, was something else. Marcus reached in and pulled it out. It was a photograph sealed in a plastic bag. Even wet through the plastic, he could make out the image. It was a person. A young man, maybe 20, smiling, holding up a diploma. Below the photo, in clear handwriting on the back. "Report found this to the police. Tell them about the others. A friend." Marcus dropped the photograph. His legs felt weak. He looked back at the pool, at the shapes beneath the water. His daughter had been painting, feet away from whatever this was, all afternoon. The beautiful Saturday afternoon had turned into something else entirely. The sun was still shining. The sky was still blue, but the world had transformed around him in an instant. Marcus Chen realized, with terrible clarity, that he was about to become the person who knew something terrible. That his ordinary life was about to intersect with something extraordinary and dark and real, in a way he'd only ever seen on news programs he'd watched with the sound turned down. He reached for his phone with a hand that didn't feel like his own. The 911 dispatcher's voice was professionally calm, the kind of calm that Marcus imagined came from years of training and exposure to terrible situations. He found that her composure made his own hysteria worse somehow. The contrast was brutal. "I have a paint can," Marcus heard himself saying, aware that he wasn't making sense. "There are multiple paint cans in my pool, and I think there might be something underneath the paint. I think there might be." "Sir, I need you to slow down," the dispatcher said. "Can you tell me your address?" He gave it to her. His hands were still shaking. He'd moved away from the pool, standing on the back patio, trying to arrange his thoughts into coherent language. Through the glass door of the kitchen, he could see Emma and her friends huddled together, Tyler and Alexis with their arms around each other, Emma's face pale with understanding that something was wrong, that something was very wrong. Justin had come downstairs, somehow sensing the shift in the house's atmosphere. He stood behind his sister, trying to look tough and failing completely. "We're dispatching police and paramedics to your location," the dispatcher continued. "It will take approximately 8 minutes. I want you to remain outside of the pool area. Is that understood? Do not touch anything else in the pool." Understood, Marcus said. Do you think someone is drowning? I don't. I think someone might have been in there for a while. I think that's what I think. The dispatcher paused. Sir, I'm going to send additional resources. Can you confirm there may be more than one body? The word landed like a stone. Body, not person, not someone, body. Yes, Marcus said. I think so. The call ended with instructions to wait for emergency services. Marcus stood on the patio, the phone still in his hand, and became aware of sounds in the neighborhood. A dog barking 3 houses down. The Henderson's sprinkler system hissing to life across the street. The ordinary soundtrack of suburban life that should have felt comforting but instead felt deeply, obscenely wrong. The kids came outside. Dad, Emma's voice was small, younger than it had been that morning. What's happening? Marcus looked at his daughter and realized that he had no idea how to answer. She was 17. She should be worrying about college applications and whether Tyler liked her the way she liked him. She should not be standing in her backyard waiting for police because something terrible was happening in the family swimming pool. We need to stay inside, Marcus said. All of us, let me get you all inside. But Dad, Emma started. Inside, now I'm serious. The sirens started 2 minutes later. The first to arrive was a police cruiser, lights flashing red and blue, the colors fragmenting against the white siding of the house. A single officer, a woman who looked to be in her late 40s, got out and approached quickly, her hand resting on her belt. Mr. Chen, she asked. Yes, I'm Marcus Chen. Officer Sandra Robles, you called about possible bodies in your pool. Marcus gestured toward the pool house. There, in the deep end, I found this. He'd brought the photograph with him, still in its plastic bag. He handed it to the officer. Robles examined the photograph, her expression not changing. You touched this. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do. That's fine, that's understandable. She spoke into her radio, her voice coded and professional. Dispatch, I'm on scene. We have at least 2 bodies confirmed in a residential pool, requesting dive team and coroner, lock down the scene. Bodies plural confirmed. The word confirmed was worse somehow than the word bodies. It meant acceptance. It meant agreement that this was real. Within minutes, the neighborhood filled with emergency vehicles. What had been a quiet, ordinary Saturday afternoon transformed into something that looked like a crime scene because that was what it was becoming. A crime scene. In the Chen family's backyard, where the kids had been playing all day, where families came to swim in the summer, where Sarah had taught Justin to dive when he was 7. A homicide detective arrived before the dive team. His name was Detective James Morrison, and he moved through Marcus's backyard with the air of a man who'd seen this particular tragedy before and would see it again. He was tall, African-American, with gray at his temples and the kind of tired eyes that came from spending a career looking at the worst things people could do to each other. Mr. Chen, Morrison said, I'm going to need you to walk me through exactly what happened. When did you discover the cans? Marcus went through it step by step. The pool maintenance that morning, the afternoon with the kids, the painting project, the moment he decided to skim what he'd thought was debris. Morrison was writing notes. And you're certain you didn't see this when you checked the pool this morning? Positive I would have noticed. So they were placed there between this morning and approximately 3 o'clock this afternoon. Yes. Morrison's eyes sharpened. In broad daylight with people in and around the pool. We were in the pool until maybe 1:30, Marcus said. Then they were painting over on the deck. I was in and out of the house. The kids were here. It would have been risky, but not impossible, Morrison finished. Someone could have done it if they knew the property well enough, if they knew the timing, if they were motivated enough. The implications of that settled over them both like a cloud. The dive team arrived in a truck marked Water Rescue. They were professional, efficient, moving through the backyard with the singular focus of people who'd trained extensively for exactly this situation. Marcus watched as they began to set up their equipment, as one of them entered the water and descended into the deep end. That was when Sarah called. Hey, she said, her voice still carrying the stress of the settlement meeting. I'm wrapping up here. Traffic's going to be murder. I'll probably be home in about 40 minutes. Order dinner if you want, or I can grab something on the way. Marcus found he couldn't form words. Marcus, you there? Sarah, he said carefully. I need you to know something before you get home, and I need you to stay calm. Her voice changed immediately. What's wrong? Are the kids okay? They're fine, they're safe, but the police are here. There's been a situation with the pool. What do you mean, a situation? Marcus closed his eyes. I found bodies, multiple bodies, in the pool. The police are investigating now. I don't have all the details yet, but I wanted you to know before you got home and saw all the emergency vehicles. There was silence on the line. Then, that's not funny, Marcus. I know, I'm not joking. I'm coming home now, Sarah said, and the line went dead. Over the next hour, Marcus was ushered into his living room with the kids while the backyard became an active crime scene. Officers cordoned off sections with yellow tape. The dive team recovered the cans one by one, carefully bringing them up, placing them on the deck, documenting everything. Each can seemed to contain something. Each can had been deliberate. Emma sat on the couch, her arm around Justin, both of them quiet in a way that broke Marcus's heart. Tyler and Alexis sat across from them, texting their parents needing to be picked up. How many? Emma asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer because he didn't know, because the dive team was still bringing up containers, because the answer was growing in real time and nobody was stopping it. By the time Sarah arrived, screeching into the driveway and abandoning her car at an angle, there were 9 paint cans lined up on the pool deck. 9 containers, 9 somethings. She found Marcus in the kitchen, watching through the window. Tell me what happened, she demanded. He did, every detail. Her face grew whiter as he spoke. My God, she whispered. My God, Marcus, the kids were right there. They were right there the whole time. I know. We have to get them out of here. We have to get them somewhere else. The police need to take statements from them, from me, from everyone who was here. Then we get a lawyer. We get one right now. My firm I can call. Sarah, we're not suspects. We discovered it. We called the police. That doesn't matter. We need representation. We need. She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. I need to sit down. They sat in the living room, and Sarah called her firm while Marcus sat quietly beside her. The legal part of his brain, the part that had observed lawyers in movies and TV shows, understood her impulse. But the human part of him rebelled against it. The idea that they needed to protect themselves, that they needed layers between them and the truth, felt like contamination. Detective Morrison came in around 6 o'clock and asked if they could speak in the dining room. I need to go through a few things with you, Morrison said. Not as suspects, I want to be clear about that, but as people with knowledge of this property and these events. What exactly did you find? Sarah asked, her voice sharp with her lawyer's training. I can't discuss the details of an active investigation, Morrison replied, not unkindly. But I can tell you that we've recovered what appears to be 9 sealed containers. Each one contains remains. Based on preliminary assessment, we're looking at multiple victims, possibly spanning several years. Sarah's hand gripped Marcus's under the table. I need to know, Morrison continued, if you've seen anything unusual in the last several weeks or months. Anyone around the property who seemed out of place. Anyone accessing the pool at odd hours. Anything. Marcus went through everything he could think of. The security system hadn't shown any alerts, though it was possible someone had disabled it. The gate was always locked, but someone with key access could have gotten in. The pool was relatively private, screened from the neighbors by hedging and fence. How long have you lived here? Morrison asked. 8 years, Sarah said. And you've maintained the pool in that time? I have, Marcus said. I clean it regularly. I maintain the chemistry. I would have seen something. When was the pool last professionally serviced? Marcus thought back. Maybe 6 months ago, we had someone come out for the filter system. Morrison made a note. I'll need that company's information. Could you have missed something? Is it possible some of these were already in the pool and you didn't notice? No, Marcus said firmly. I would have seen. I'm careful about. Dad, Emma's voice came from the living room. Then Tyler's. A murmur of something that might have been news on the television, or might have been the local news picking up the story of the bodies found in the suburban pool. Morrison stood. That's enough for now. We'll be back for formal statements tomorrow. In the meantime, if you think of anything, anything at all, you call me. He handed Marcus a card. Detective James Morrison, Homicide Division. That night, nobody slept much. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, reading headlines that were already starting to appear. Local man DISCOVRS multiple BODIES in pool. Police investigate DATHS in residential neighborhood. 1 of 9 VICTIMS identified as missing person from 2019. That last one stopped them both cold. 6 years ago, that meant someone had been in their pool for 6 years, hidden, waiting, while they'd had parties and barbecues and summer Sundays and family dinners on the patio. Around midnight, Marcus went down to the basement and sat in the dark. Sarah found him there an hour later, still sitting, still not moving. "We're going to get through this," she said, sitting beside him. Marcus didn't respond. He was thinking about the person in the pool, about their family, about what it meant that they'd been in his backyard all that time, that he'd been maintaining the pool, chlorinating the water, keeping it pristine, while a human being decomposed inside a paint can. He was thinking about how, a few hours ago, his biggest worry had been whether to order pizza or cook dinner. He was thinking about the moment when he decided to skim what he thought was debris, and how that moment had split his life into before and after, and how he would never, ever get the before back. The story broke open on Sunday morning with the kind of media velocity that suggested someone in the police department or the coroner's office hadn't been as careful with information as they should have been. By 8 a.m., news vans were parked outside the Chen property. By 9 a.m., satellite trucks had joined them. By 10 a.m., the street looked like it had been invaded by a small television city. Marcus stood in the upstairs bedroom looking down at the reporters gathering on their lawn and felt something close to surreal detachment. This wasn't real. This was something that happened to other people. People whose lives were already fractured, already struggling, already touched by tragedy. Not to him, not to them. But it was, and they were. Sarah had spent the night on her laptop, pulling case files on missing person reports from the past decade. She'd organized them by age, by description, by location. She was preparing, the way lawyers prepared, armoring herself with information, trying to gain control through knowledge. "If we're going to have a media circus on our lawn," she'd said at 3 a.m., when Marcus had found her still working, "we should at least understand what we're dealing with." What they were dealing with became clearer and more horrifying as the day progressed. Detective Morrison showed up at their house at noon, this time with a warrant and a forensic team. They needed to collect evidence from the pool area, from Marcus's maintenance records, from anything that might help them establish when the cans had been placed. "We've identified one of the 9 individuals," Morrison said, speaking quietly in the kitchen while the forensic team worked outside. "The one we found first. His name was Michael Torres, age 24. He was reported missing by his family in 2019, disappeared after his college graduation. Family's been searching for 6 years. Marcus felt the weight of that. 6 years, a family searching, and the body had been in his pool the entire time. "The photograph you found in the can was him," Morrison continued. "In his cap and gown. Someone put his graduation photo in there intentionally. Someone wanted him to be found and identified." "Why?" Sarah asked, her lawyer's mind already circling the angles. "Why put them in paint cans? Why put them in a backyard pool they didn't have access to? Why the photograph?" Morrison shook his head. "That's what we're trying to figure out." Over the next 3 days, 5 more victims were identified. The names and stories began to emerge. Michael Torres, 2019, collegiate swimmer, disappeared after graduation. Amanda Kessler, 2019, nursing student, missing for 6 years. David Park, 2020, software engineer, vanished without a trace. Jessica Ramirez, 2020, high school senior, never came home from work. Thomas Whitmore, 2021, physical therapist, reported missing by his husband. The 9th victim remained unidentified, but according to Morrison, forensic analysis suggested they'd been deceased for at least 8 to 10 years. 8 years, 10 years. The paint cans had been sitting in the Chen family's pool while they'd been completely unaware, completely ignorant, completely unable to prevent whatever this was. News outlets began to speculate about serial killers, about disposal methods, about what kind of person would use someone else's pool as a burial ground. True crime podcasters started calling it the pool case. Reddit threads multiplied. Conspiracy theories emerged. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had become a hostile environment. Neighbors who'd waved at them before now turned away when Marcus or Sarah passed. The Hendersons, who lived directly across the street and had been friendly for years, suddenly didn't come outside when the families were in view. Parents at Justin's school began talking, and Justin came home with stories of other kids asking if his dad was a killer, if his house was haunted, if they should even be allowed to attend birthday parties at his place. "It's not fair," Justin said, his 15-year-old sense of justice wounded. "We didn't do anything." "I know, buddy," Marcus said, "but sometimes unfair things happen." Emma, meanwhile, had become somewhat of a local celebrity, the girl who'd been painting pool adjacent when corpses were discovered nearby. There were think pieces written about her resilience, about the way young people process trauma. One journalist had apparently tried to contact her for an interview, which Sarah had shut down with a legal threat. By day 5 of the investigation, Morrison had a theory. He came to the house again, this time looking haggard and deeply, profoundly tired. He sat in the living room with Marcus and Sarah and delivered his working hypothesis. "We believe that the cans were not placed at random," he said. "We believe this person knew your property, knew the layout, knew the schedule, knew how often you accessed the pool area." "Someone we knew," Sarah's voice went tight. "Possibly, or someone who'd surveilled the property extensively. We're looking at the pool maintenance professionals who have had access over the past decade. We're looking at landscapers, construction workers, anyone who might have had reason to be here and reason to pay attention to your schedules." "Jesus," Marcus whispered. "There's something else," Morrison continued. "The person who left the photograph and the note, whoever put Michael Torr's image in that can, they wanted him to be found. They wanted his family to know. This wasn't someone trying to hide the bodies. This was someone trying to ensure they'd be discovered." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why put them somewhere so public? Why risk it?" "That's what I can't figure out," Morrison admitted. "Unless it wasn't about hiding them, unless it was about revelation, unless someone wants people to know about this." After Morrison left, Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. She began mapping out what they knew: victims' ages, professions, last known locations, dates of disappearance. She was looking for connections, for patterns, for the thing that would explain why these 9 people had ended up in their pool. "8 was it?" Marcus asked. "What?" "You said Morrison thinks 8 to 10 years for the oldest one. Our pool was installed 9 years ago." Sarah's fingers stopped moving. She looked at Marcus, then back at the computer screen. "You're not suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just nodding that the timeline includes our entire pool ownership, from the day we had it installed to now." Sarah closed the laptop. "That doesn't mean anything. It could be coincidence." But they both knew better. There was no coincidence in something like this. There was only cause and effect, intention and consequence, patterns waiting to be decoded. That night, Marcus found an old maintenance file from the pool installation. September 2016. The contractor's name was Riverside Pools and Construction. He called the company during business hours the next day. "I'm calling about a pool installation from 2016, Marcus told the woman who answered. "September 2016. We want to know if you have records of everyone who worked on that project." "I can look," the woman said, but she didn't sound optimistic. "That's pretty far back. We might not have detailed crew records from that far back." "It's important," Marcus said. "It's related to a police investigation." That got her attention. She put him on hold, and he listened to generic hold music for what felt like 20 minutes before she came back. "I found something," she said. "We installed 2 pools that month. One was yours. According to our records, the crew was managed by our foreman at the time, Dave Kennedy. But our records show he's no longer with the company. Left in 2017, and we don't have current contact information." Marcus's heart rate accelerated. "Do you have any other information, any address or anything?" "Just his last employment record, but that's going to be personal information. I shouldn't give that out." "Can you give it to the police?" Marcus asked. He called Morrison immediately and gave him the name and the company. "Dave Kennedy," Morrison said, like the name meant something. "We're already looking at him." "What do you mean, already looking at him?" "He worked as an independent contractor for several pool companies in the area. We found that out when we looked at maintenance professionals with access to your property. Kennedy is our primary person of interest right now." "Where is he?" "That's the problem," Morrison said. "We don't know. He hasn't had a permanent address since 2017. We're looking for him now." For 2 more days, Dave Kennedy was at large. The media made him a local celebrity, running his photograph on every news feed, asking if anyone had seen him, suggesting that the suburban community was harboring a serial killer. The reality was probably closer to a man who'd gone underground, who was either hiding or dead or simply gone in the way that sometimes happens to people who fall outside the bounds of normal society. Then on day 8, they found him. Dave Kennedy, age 47, was discovered in a rental car parked in the basement garage of an apartment complex 30 miles away. He'd been dead for approximately 3 days, according to the coroner's initial assessment. Empty bottles of prescription pills were scattered across the passenger seat. A suicide note, written in the same handwriting as the note found in Michael Torr's paint can, explained nothing except that Kennedy wanted people to know what he'd done, wanted the families to know, wanted to stop. The note said, "They were suffering, I ended it, that's all I know. I can't explain why I saved them the way I did. I can't explain myself at all." That was all. Those were the only answers anyone would ever get from Dave Kennedy. The media had a villain now. The narrative solidified. The investigation, though ongoing in terms of forensic details and formal charges and all the bureaucratic machinery of justice, had effectively ended. The person responsible was dead. The bodies were identified, all 9 eventually, with the oldest victim being a man named Robert Chen, no relation, who disappeared in 2014, 17 years before his remains were found. 17 years in the pool. But the end of the investigation wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of the aftermath. The Chen family home became uninhabitable without becoming formally abandoned. They couldn't stay in it. Every room echoed with the knowledge of what had been happening just outside the back door. Every time Marcus looked at the pool, he saw the paint cans. Every time Sarah walked by the window, she imagined the bodies resting at the bottom of the deep end. They moved into a hotel while Sarah handled the legal fallout. There would be lawsuits, she explained. There would be families demanding answers, demanding justice, demanding monetary compensation for the trauma of having their loved ones hidden in a stranger's pool. There would be negligence claims, possibly wrongful death claims, investigations into whether Marcus should have noticed something earlier, done something differently. "This isn't your fault," Sarah said during one of their nighttime conversations in the hotel room. But the lawyer in her was already preparing for a jury that might disagree. Emma and Justin started therapy. Emma's therapist recommended a temporary withdrawal from school, which Emma refused, insisting that she needed structure and normalcy. Justin started having panic attacks in the night, waking up screaming, the dreams populating his subconscious with paint cans and drowning. After the 3rd night of this, they found him medication from a psychiatrist and a sleep schedule that sometimes worked. Tyler stopped coming around. His parents had made him distance himself from the Chen family, not out of malice but out of caution, out of a desire to separate their own family from the toxicity that seemed to surround the Chens. Marcus understood. It was the rational thing. It was also brutal. The pool remained. The police cordoned it off as a crime scene for 2 weeks after Kennedy's body was found, then released it back to the Chens with strict instructions about decontamination protocols. Sarah called a remediation company. Marcus couldn't bring himself to oversee the process. He sat in a coffee shop 2 miles away instead, not drinking his coffee, just sitting. When he finally returned to the house to oversee the final decontamination of the pool deck, he found Sarah already there, watching men in hazmat suits drain and flush the water system, replace the filter entirely, chemically treat the concrete. "We're draining it," Sarah said. "The whole thing. We're not keeping a pool that's been turned into a mass grave." "Okay," Marcus said. "I called a contractor. He's going to fill it in, put dirt there. We can landscape it, maybe a garden, something living, something that isn't a memorial to dead bodies." "Okay," Marcus said again. That night, they sat in the living room, their living room in their house that didn't feel like home anymore, and looked at the paperwork for the lawsuits that were beginning to multiply. The family of Michael Torres wanted $3 million. The family of Jessica Ramirez wanted $5 million. The family of Robert Chen, who'd been missing so long that there were only distant relatives to pursue the claim, wanted $2 million. There would be more, Sarah's legal partner informed her. The media was helping. Every time a news story ran, more families came forward, more lawyers got involved, more requests for compensation entered their lives. "We can settle," Sarah's partner suggested. "Or we can fight. The insurance company will cover it mostly. Homeowners insurance doesn't typically cover something like this, but we might be able to argue partial coverage through other policies." Marcus stopped listening after a while. The numbers didn't matter to him. The strategy didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that 9 people were dead and they'd been hidden on his property, and he was alive and they were not, and no amount of money was going to change that fundamental injustice. Emma came home from school one day and said she'd been approached by a documentarian who wanted to make a film about the case. "The Girl Who Survived the Pool House," the working title was. Emma had said no. The documentarian had persisted. Sarah had threatened legal action. The documentarian had gone quiet. But they didn't go away. Producers called. Networks pitched. True crime became obsessed with the Chens, not as victims, but as the people who'd been tangentially connected to the crime. There were books being written, Marcus realized, when his phone's search recommendation algorithm started showing him true crime lists mentioning his own name. "We're going to sell the house," Sarah announced on day 21 of living in the hotel. "We're going to sell it at a loss, we're going to move somewhere else, and we're going to try to put this behind us." "Okay," Marcus said. The real estate agent who listed the property did so with visible discomfort. Nobody wanted to buy the house where the paint cans had been found. Nobody wanted to inherit the history of it. They were able to rent it out to someone who apparently didn't believe in the power of tragedy or didn't pay much attention to the news, but selling it was a different matter. After 6 weeks on the market with no serious offers, the real estate agent suggested they drop the price significantly. "This is extremely location-specific," the agent said carefully. "The stigma is quite powerful. Buyers aren't going to want to raise families in a house with this history." They dropped the price, then dropped it again. Eventually, someone bought it, a rental company looking to flip it, not caring about the history, just seeing an opportunity to buy low and sell moderate once the publicity died down. The Chens accepted the offer and closed on the transaction feeling like they'd escaped something terrible and known they hadn't, not really, not in any way that mattered. Marcus found a new job at a different firm, one further from the neighborhood, where people didn't know his name immediately and connect it to the news story. Sarah continued at her firm, but the dynamic had shifted. Clients who'd previously seemed comfortable with her were now hesitant. A major deal fell through. The client said it was unrelated to the Chen situation, but everyone knew better. 2 months after the pool was filled in and the house was sold, Emma asked if they could visit the cemetery where Michael Torres had been buried. The funeral had been a major community event, a young man finally getting to be laid to rest after 6 years of being missing, of being feared dead in some unknown way. Now he was officially dead, officially mourned, officially in the ground. Sarah took Emma. Marcus stayed home because he wasn't sure he had the right to be there, which was irrational but felt true regardless. When they returned, Emma was quieter than usual. "His mother thanked me," Emma said. "For what?" Marcus asked. "For being there when they found him, for being part of the way he got back home. She said that if it wasn't for me painting the pool deck, if it wasn't for the combination of circumstances that led to you finding the cans, Michael would still be missing. His family would still be wondering, and at least now they know. At least now they can grieve properly." Marcus considered this. He wasn't sure if Michael Torres' mother was right, if closure was worth the trauma of having your child discovered in a paint can in someone else's pool. But he understood the impulse to find meaning in terrible things. "That was kind of her to say," Marcus said carefully. "I think I want to do volunteer work," Emma said. "At the community center, help families of missing people. I know what it feels like to have something terrible happen that's connected to you but not caused by you. I think that's something I can use." Marcus looked at his daughter and felt something shift inside him. She had been 17 years old when she'd been painting near a pool containing 9 bodies. She was now in the place where she could consider channeling that experience into something constructive. He couldn't be more proud and couldn't feel more devastated that she'd had to grow up this way. 6 months after the cans were found, the media moved on to the next story. A politician was caught in a scandal. A celebrity died unexpectedly. A new crime emerged to capture the public consciousness. The Chen case became last month's news, then last season's true crime obsession, then a footnote in discussions about the prevalence of serial killers in America. The families didn't move on. The families probably never would. but they became more distant from the Chen family's trauma, less immediately connected. The Chens had been the conduit, the unfortunate vector through which the tragedy had been revealed, but they weren't the primary victims. That distinction belonged to the 9 dead people and their families. Marcus started going to therapy himself. A man named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, who specialized in trauma experienced by people who were witnesses to crime rather than direct victims. She helped him understand the particular guilt of surviving something terrible, of being the one who discovered it, of having his life irrevocably changed by circumstances completely outside his control. Guilt isn't always proportional to responsibility, Dr. Okonkwo said during one session. You found bodies that were hidden on your property. That's traumatic. That's terrible. But it's not your fault that they were there. You didn't put them there. You didn't know about them. Your guilt is real, but it doesn't have a corresponding crime that you committed. I should have noticed, Marcus said. I should have maintained the pool better or paid more attention or what? You should have discovered the crime earlier and prevented the deaths. The deaths already happened. They happened before you found the cans. Your discovery didn't cause the deaths. The serial killer caused the deaths. But if you'd known, you still couldn't have changed the past. You only could have changed how you responded when you found out. And you responded correctly. You called the police. You cooperated with the investigation. You helped get 9 people identified so their families could have closure. Marcus understood this intellectually. But his gut, the part of him that lived in the moment when he'd pulled that paint can out of the water, still insisted that he should have known, should have done something, should have been better. 1 year after the discovery, the house, the one they'd sold at a loss, appeared on a true crime podcast's list of the top 10 most haunted houses in America. The couple renting it had noticed strange phenomena, unexplained noises, water running from the backyard taps at odd hours, guests saying they felt watched. Marcus read the article and felt a mix of anger and resignation. The house wasn't haunted. The house was just a house. But human beings seem to need for terrible things to have an ongoing supernatural component. It was easier to believe in ghosts than to accept that serial killers were real and could operate undetected in your own neighborhood. 14 months after the discovery, Detective Morrison called Marcus with news. Dave Kennedy's apartment, finally fully processed and searched, had yielded a journal. In it, Kennedy had documented everything, not out of remorse, but out of a need to explain his logic to a world he clearly felt had wronged him. I can't share the details, Morrison said, because it's evidence in an ongoing investigation of the historical cases. But I thought you should know that we've got some answers, not all of them, but some. What answers? Marcus asked. Kennedy was a victim of trauma earlier in his life. He was attacked by a group of young people when he was in his 20s, left for dead essentially, though he survived. Spinal damage, chronic pain. He became obsessed with an idea that suffering was universal, that everyone was suffering, that he was just making explicit what was implicit in everyone's lives. That's insane, Marcus said. Yes, Morrison agreed, which is why he killed 9 people. The psychological profile that emerged as more details from Kennedy's journal were released suggested a man who'd experienced severe trauma, mental illness, and social isolation. A man who'd worked in pools because water was his only comfort, and who'd eventually converted that space of comfort into a space of death. A man who'd targeted people with their own vulnerabilities, depression, addiction, loneliness, despair, and convinced them to enter the water with him one final time. The actual mechanism of death remained unclear. Drowning was suspected, but Kennedy's journal suggested something more ritualistic, more intentional. He described it as ending suffering, which wasn't an admission of anything specific, just a philosophy that had justified everything. Sarah received a letter from a legal firm representing some of the victims' families. The letter requested that the Chens establish a charitable foundation in the names of the 9 victims. The families wanted something good to come from the tragedy. They wanted Michael Torr's memory to fund scholarships for disadvantaged swimmers. They wanted Jessica Ramirez's name attached to a support hotline for missing persons' families. They wanted Robert Chen's legacy to be something other than 17 years of being hidden in water. Sarah brought the letter to Marcus and asked what he thought. I think it's a good idea, Marcus said. It will keep us connected to this, Sarah warned. We'll be answering emails about it for years. We'll be speaking publicly about something we want to forget. But, Marcus prompted, because he could hear the but in her tone. But I think it's a good idea too, Sarah said. I think it's something we should do. They established the Torres Kessler Park Ramirez Whitmore Foundation. The ninth victim, Robert Chen, had asked anonymously to not be included after some thought from his remaining family. The foundation funneled money toward missing person investigations, toward mental health services in underserved communities, toward water safety and pool accessibility for low-income families. It didn't absolve them of anything. It didn't make the trauma retroactive. It didn't undo the year of chaos and media scrutiny. But it gave Marcus something to do besides therapy and rumination. It gave Sarah a project that felt purposeful rather than reactionary. Emma started college a year later, declaring a major in social work with a focus on missing persons cases and grief support. She volunteered at the foundation, which led to internships, which led to a trajectory that Marcus realized was healing her by channeling her experience into helping others navigate similar trauma. Justin, meanwhile, had become obsessed with forensics and crime scene investigation. He'd taken to watching crime documentaries with the intensity of someone preparing for a future he'd already chosen. His therapist said that was him processing, taking the random, chaotic, traumatic thing that had happened and systematizing it, making it make sense through the framework of science and investigation. 2 years after the discovery, on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, Marcus found himself in the backyard of their new house, a small Victorian with a manageable yard and no pool. He was pruning the roses when the doorbell rang. It was Tyler. "Hi, Mr. Chen," Tyler said, his voice deeper now, his face more mature. He was in college, Marcus realized, or heading there. "I know it's been a while, but I wanted to check in, see how you guys were doing." Marcus set down his pruning shears and felt something in his chest release. "Come inside," he said. "Sarah will want to see you. She's been asking about you." Over coffee, Tyler explained that he'd been struggling to maintain the friendship after Kennedy's arrest had made the Chen name toxic in their neighborhood. His parents had been protective, had wanted him to distance himself, and he'd been 16 and hadn't known how to push back. "But I realized," Tyler said, "that what happened wasn't on you guys, and you were the ones who deserved support, not the ones who should be avoided." "You were a kid," Marcus said. "You did what you thought you needed to do. That's okay." "It doesn't feel okay," Tyler said, "but thank you for saying it." They talked for 2 hours. Tyler mentioned that he was considering studying environmental science. He told them about his family, about how his parents' financial situation had stabilized, about how they'd started looking at houses to buy again. "Maybe one with a pool," Tyler said, smiling slightly. "Though after what happened to yours, I'm not sure I'm that enthusiastic anymore." Marcus laughed, a real laugh, not forced, not bitter. "You should have a pool. Pools are good. Bad things shouldn't preclude good things." After Tyler left, Sarah sat down next to Marcus on the couch. "That was nice," she said. "It was," Marcus agreed. 3 years after the discovery, the true crime fervor had nearly entirely died. The case was mentioned occasionally in retrospectives about serial killers, but it had lost the immediacy that had made it so compelling. New crimes had emerged, new mysteries, new tragedies for the public to consume in digital form. The Chens had settled into a new normal. Emma was finishing her first year of college and doing well, genuinely well, not the forced kind. Justin was in his senior year of high school and had started his internship at the county coroner's office, observing, learning, systematizing the chaos of death into science. Marcus and Sarah had rebuilt their marriage after the stress of the discovery had threatened to tear it apart. They'd gone to couples therapy. They'd learned to talk about the trauma without having it colonize every conversation. They'd remembered why they'd married each other beyond the fact that they had kids together. Sarah made senior partner at her firm, a position that had previously seemed unreachable after the publicity of the case. But time had done its work. Her competence had reasserted itself. People stopped connecting her name immediately to tragedy. She was just a good lawyer now, instead of that lawyer whose husband found bodies in his pool. Marcus still had occasional nightmares. He still sometimes saw the shape of the paint can when he looked at water. But the intensity of the trauma had faded to something he could live with, something that didn't define every moment. One evening, sitting on the porch of the new house, Sarah said something that Marcus had been thinking but hadn't articulated. "I used to think that terrible things should come with clear lessons," she said. That if someone experienced trauma, there should be a corresponding growth, a corresponding wisdom, a corresponding redemption. But this, what happened with the pool, there's no lesson. There's no wisdom. There's just the fact that bad things happen to random people for no reason, and sometimes the randomness works in your favor because you discover something terrible instead of being directly harmed by it. Is that a bad thing? Marcus asked. Finding out instead of being killed. No, Sarah said. But it's not a good thing either. It's just a thing, and I think I've finally made peace with that. It's a thing that happened. It's not a lesson. It's not a story with a moral. It's just a thing. Marcus took her hand, and they sat in silence, watching the sun set over their ordinary yard with its ordinary grass and ordinary roses, and no pool slowly decomposing into nothing remarkable at all. The foundation continued its work. The website was up. The scholarship fund was distributed to swimmers whose circumstances might have been vulnerable. The helpline received calls from people desperate for any information about missing loved ones. Emma volunteered there, her voice calm and professional, her ability to empathize evident in every conversation. 5 years after the paint cans had surfaced, the Chens held an event. The foundation was throwing a community gathering, a fundraiser at a local community pool, which nobody had thought would be appropriate until Emma had suggested it with quiet certainty. The pool shouldn't be an awful place, she'd said. It should be a place where people could learn to swim safely, where people could feel comfortable in the water. Let's make that the legacy. So they'd organized a swimming for safety event, with instructors teaching children from low-income neighborhoods how to swim, how to survive in the water, how to feel empowered rather than threatened by what water represented. Marcus stood on the deck of the community pool and watched as dozens of kids splashed in the shallow end, laughing, playing, learning. Volunteers in foundation, T-shirts moved among them, encouraging, assisting, creating the kind of community resource that Michael Tors might have needed if he'd been struggling with depression, if he'd been looking for something to hold on to. Detective Morrison was there, retired now, working part-time as a consultant for the foundation. He stood next to Marcus and watched the kids. "Never thought I'd see the day," Morrison said. "You standing by a pool not having a panic attack." "I still have them," Marcus said, "just less frequently." "That's growth," Morrison said. Sarah was in the office area, working on the year's budget reports. Emma was in the water with a group of kids who'd been particularly fearful of drowning, her presence and confidence gradually transferring to them. Justin wasn't there. He was finishing his first year at university, studying forensic pathology, building on the internship that had started 3 years ago. He'd written a paper on the Kennedy case as part of his criminal investigation class. His professor had given him an A and requested to keep the paper for the university's archives. Marcus had read it once, had been struck by how clearly and clinically Justin had written about their trauma, as if it had happened to someone else, as if he were analyzing it from a scientific distance rather than personal experience. That was healing too, Marcus had decided. The ability to look at your own tragedy and extract objective data from it. A woman approached Marcus. She looked familiar, and it took him a moment to place her. Michael Tors' mother, Isabella Tors, whom he'd met only once before at the Foundation's opening event 3 years ago. "Mr. Chen," Isabella said, smiling, "I wanted to thank you for what you've built here. I know it started because of what happened, but what it's become, it's beautiful. Michael would have liked this." Marcus didn't know what to say. He'd never met Michael Tors. He knew him through forensic reports and photographs and family accounts. He knew him as the reason his life had fractured. But he also knew him, increasingly, as the reason the foundation existed, as the name attached to something good that was happening now. "Your son sounds like he was a good person," Marcus said. "He was," Isabella said. "He loved to swim, did you know that? From the time he was little, he'd spend hours in the water. I used to joke that he was part fish. He wanted to teach disabled kids to swim, to make water accessible to people who felt it was a barrier for them." Marcus thought about the particular cruelty of that. A young man who'd wanted to help people experience the joy of water, killed in water, hidden in water for 6 years. The irony was so profound it became almost mythological. "Then we're doing what he would have wanted," Marcus said. "The foundation, the swimming programs, this is what he would have chosen to happen." Isabella smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not absolution. but a kind of mutual understanding that they'd both been touched by this terrible thing and had found ways to live with it. After she left, Marcus stood alone by the pool again. He thought about the first time he'd approached the pool edge 5 years ago, thinking he'd find a leaf. He thought about the moment when the net had made contact with something solid, and the moment after, when his entire understanding of the world had shifted. He thought about how the worst thing that could happen to a person was often just a matter of timing and circumstance. How his neighbor's victim had been a person with a life and dreams and a family who loved him. How he, Marcus, had been given the burden of the knowledge that this person existed, had lived, had died, and had been hidden mere feet from his daily routines. He thought about whether Dave Kennedy's crime was an argument for surveillance and protection, or whether it was an argument for letting bad things happen sometimes, because the alternative was a life so controlled and regulated that it ceased to be a life at all. He didn't reach any conclusions because the question wasn't really conclusive. It was just something to sit with. Sarah came out of the office and found him standing by the pool's edge. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Marcus said, "I'm okay." And he was, more or less, not recovered. Recovery implied a return to a previous state, and he'd never be the version of himself who didn't know what had happened. But he'd integrated it. He'd made space for the trauma in the architecture of his life. He'd built something with it. As the sun began to set, they gathered everyone for the closing ceremony. Emma read a statement about each of the 9 victims, their dreams, their lives, their impact on the people who loved them. Michael Torres, the swimmer, Amanda Kessler, the nurse, David Park, the engineer, Jessica Ramirez, the high school student, Thomas Whitmore, the physical therapist, and the 4 others whose stories were less widely known but no less tragic. And Marcus understood, finally, that the story wasn't about the discovery of the bodies, or the investigation, or even the darkness that Dave Kennedy had brought into their lives. The story was about what happened after, about the choices people made to honor the dead, to protect the living, to build something meaningful from something meaningless. He thought about the 15-second hook, the way it had promised a dramatic revelation. He thought about how the real story had been much slower, much less cinematic, much more about the daily work of living with trauma than about the moment of discovery. And he thought about how Emma had been right when she decided to volunteer after Michael Torres' funeral. How the best response to tragedy wasn't to hide from it, but to acknowledge it, to sit with it, and to use it as motivation to make sure that other people experienced less suffering, less loss, less darkness. The sun set over the community pool. The kids were tired and happy. The foundation workers were already planning next month's event. And Marcus stood with his wife and watched the water reflect the last light of the day, and he found, to his surprise, that he could do it without fear. The water was just water now. It was where children learned to swim. It was where people gathered for community. It was where life continued, even after terrible things had happened. And that, he realized, was the real ending to the story. Not resolution, not recovery. Just the daily work of living, of building, of continuing forward, carrying the weight of what had happened but not being crushed by it. The pool remained, and the light remained, and the people remained, and life continued.